Don't be this person. I get it. Remembering passwords is hard, especially when you're told by cybersecurity experts and nerdy friends alike not to use the same combination of username and password on any website. On top of that, your passwords ought to be long, complicated, and include a mix of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols, you name it. Remembering your login details becomes practically impossible under those conditions. So, what if you didn't have to remember them? That's exactly what the person who invented the digital password manager thought. Probably. The result is that we now have all these software services that promise to securely save our passwords for us so that we never have to worry about it again. But are they all created equal? I don't think so. We've tested 8 of the most popular and most interesting password managers on the market, and we've pitted them against each other to find the ultimate one. I'm Kalos, I like computers, and this is the Ultimate Password Managers Showdown. Huge thanks to ISL Online for sponsoring this video. Control remote machines with ease for your business with ISL Lite. ISL Lite is an affordable and feature-rich remote desktop suite, and it's super competitive within the space, especially for enterprise. Connect to unlimited machines securely with end-to-end encryption from Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, and iOS. Wake your remote machines with Wake on LAN and transfer files to and from them securely with a user-friendly interface. On top of all that, ISL Lite has RDP support for Windows hosts for a native-like experience. All that without breaking the bank. We've tested ISL Lite ourselves and we've found it to live up to its marketing. It's the kind of program you set up and stop worrying about. No matter how your business is set up, ISL Lite can fit your needs. Start your free trial now and get 15 days free. All features included, no credit card required. Before we begin, let's set the guidelines for what makes a good password manager. I'm going to be scoring each software from 1 to 10 on the following 6 categories. Category 1, security and reputation. How many security measures are in place and how reputable the security of the developer is according to past data. Category 2, features. How much customization and how many features the software offers. Category 3, platforms and integration. How many and which platforms the password manager supports and how well it integrates with different OSs and browsers. Category 4, ease of use. How straightforward and self-explanatory it is for the average user to use the software without reading a guide. Category 5, pricing. How good a deal the password manager is if it isn't completely free. And Category 6, ease of migration. How easy the password manager makes it for you to grab your stuff and jump to another service or migrate to it from another service. Let's kick right off with the most popular password manager on the market, Google Password Manager. The built-in one that comes with Google Chrome and Android. I say it's the most popular one because most people don't even realize they're using it. Seeing as Google Chrome is the most popular web browser, accounting for 64.7% of global browser usage, and Android has a 70.5% market share in mobile OSs, at least 2 in 3 computer or smartphone users have access to Google Password Manager by default. So, what does it offer? Let's start with security and reputation. The Google Password Manager syncs passwords with your Google account, which is locked behind multi-factor authentication. In the event that the password to your Google account is compromised, it will not suffice for any hacker to be able to access all the passwords stored in the Password Manager, as they won't be able to log in at all under normal circumstances. They'd have to compromise your multi-factor authentication methods as well, which is way more difficult than guessing a password. Because of the market chokehold Google has, they're able to authenticate you through many means. Smartphone apps, time-based one-time passcodes, from now on referred to as TOTP, the Android OS itself, biometrics, SMS, literally everything. Even if you're an iPhone user, every single Google app can be used to authenticate you. Thus, it's safe to say it's near impossible for a Google account to be hacked unless you get socially engineered, or finessed as we like to call it, into giving up your necessary details to a malicious actor. Also, as much as I hate to say this about a big tech megacorporation, Google has a good track record when it comes to password security. Whatever database they have for the service has never been breached, to our knowledge. As long as you want to trust a big tech megacorporation to host your data, Google's got you covered. There are 2 downsides here. The first is that while the data suggests Google is safe, we have no evidence as to how they're securing their servers. They seem to be going for the security by obscurity approach, simply saying that they're backed by world-class security, whatever that means. The second and most important one is that Google Password Manager is very susceptible to browser hijack viruses and other malicious programs. This is a huge security concern because while Google's servers might be safe, your grandma probably isn't following best practices when downloading desktop pets from 2007.
Hello.
So I must give Google Password Manager a 6 in the security and reputation category. While Google is taking precautions, the human is still the weakest link in this chain, and this password manager is more susceptible than others to malware by design. I must say that Google Password Manager is pretty bare bones when it comes to features. You're given 3 checkboxes in the web UI. That's it. Offer to save passwords, auto sign in, and password alerts. There are no options that I've come to expect from a browser, like saving payment methods and personal info like addresses for online shopping, and there are no options that I've come to expect from other password managers, like Secure Notes. It can, however, generate a password for you, so that's something. Of course, the Chrome browser can do these things, but the distinction between Chrome Autofill and Google Password Manager is really confusing. As it currently stands, you cannot manage your saved addresses, credit cards, passkeys, or anything else that isn't a username and password combo from the Google Password Manager web UI, meaning that those features are not a part of this software. However, there is one feature which is interesting, that being on-device encryption. According to Google, you can make it so that your passwords are encrypted on device before being stored on the cloud. This works in the Chrome browser, Android, and iOS devices. But apparently it's mutually exclusive with the password alerts feature, as Google will no longer be able to scour the web for any instances of your data because they will be encrypted. It's an interesting feature, but I don't know if it's useful enough to give up one feature for another. It's a nice and basic password manager for your daily needs, I guess. I can't really say I'm satisfied by its feature set, especially compared to the rest of the contenders here. I'm giving Google Password Manager a 4 on the features front. Here's where we start having trouble. Platforms and integration. Remember when I said this password manager comes with Chrome and Android? Well, it comes packaged only with Chrome and Android. If your chosen browser is not Google Chrome, which it shouldn't be anyway, you cannot use Google Password Manager on a computer unless you specifically go to the website passwords.google.com and manually copy-paste credentials into the service you're trying to log into. In other words, there is no browser extension for this, it's Chrome only. Surprisingly, you can use Google Password Manager on iOS natively by setting Chrome as your password autofill app in the settings, which is more than I was expecting from Google. Kudos in that regard, I guess. When you are using Chrome, obviously the native implementation of password management is going to work great. It can even log you in automatically as mentioned in the features section, skipping the credential input entirely. Still, I really don't want to recommend that you use Chrome, especially if all you do with it is have it installed just for bare bones password management. I'm going to give it a 6 in platforms and integration, just because Chrome is available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and there's an iOS implementation for the password autofill if you really want it. Alright, if we're talking ease of use, this is one of the easiest password managers to use due to its bare bones design. Again, most people that are using it are not even realizing it. There are non-intrusive floating dialog boxes when you log into a website that there are no saved credentials for, and the options are clear and not predatory. After that, there's no more friction with the user. It's all just a part of their browser or their phone. Despite this, I cannot rate Google Password Manager very highly in the ease of use category because of several pitfalls. There is no independent password generator, it only appears when you're creating a new account somewhere or changing a password. Also, go ahead and ask a clueless user to find where their passwords are saved. I guarantee you they won't know, and that's because Google Password Manager is hidden away within the Chrome browser settings. Most people forget it exists, or even worse, they don't know it exists, and they've been giving Google their data without realizing. I gotta give Google Password Manager a 7 on ease of use. It's easy, but it's not exactly friendly, and it isn't adequately communicated to the user that they're using it. Thus, many people are unaware that they can find their stored passwords in their browser settings. When it comes to pricing, there's no premium option. It's free, as long as you're okay with giving Google your data, and as long as you keep using Chrome as your web browser. Personally, I'd consider that a price to pay, but I'm not going to deduct points for that. The pricing category is strictly money related, and when it comes to money, Google Password Manager requires that you pay none of it. It gets a 10. Lastly, how easy is it to migrate to or from Google Password Manager? Actually, ridiculously easy. All you have to do is go into the settings in the web UI, and there are big buttons to import or export your data in CSV format. Yeah, I'm happy with this actually. It could support more formats, but this is perfectly fine. 9. Overall, Google Password Manager is a pretty solid basic credentials vault. If you want to use it, it's perfectly usable on pretty much every platform. Although, it should be noted that most of the praise comes from how easy it is to use, not how much it offers you. If you're the kind of person who wants more features, I would advise that you keep watching.
Microsoft Edge Wallet.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, as I'll mostly compare it with its Google counterpart that I just reviewed. It comes packaged with the Microsoft Edge browser, and unlike Google with its Android OS, Microsoft only has Windows to use to force this service onto you. So how are they selling this? Firstly, concerning security and reputation, it's important to note that just like Google, Microsoft doesn't have any recent breaches that we can refer to, let alone ones that concern Edge Wallet. Also, Microsoft accounts are secured in very similar ways to Google accounts, and it's unlikely that your Microsoft account will be breached unless your password is, well, password. I'm going to give it a 6 as well. It has a slight leg up on Google because it stores your credentials in an encrypted way on device. But, just like Google Password Manager, we really cannot be assured of its true safety, and it's also susceptible to the same browser hijack attacks as Chrome. Now, here's where Microsoft Edge Wallet has an edge over its Google rival. On top of offering all of the features that Chrome offers, like showing you how many of your passwords have been leaked, it also stores payment methods and personal info such as your name and address, so that you can check out on online shopping websites extremely fast. This, in contrast to Google's implementation, is a part of Microsoft Edge Wallet, so that you can find all the info and modify it very easily. On top of this, Edge Wallet is encrypted on device by default as previously mentioned, without sacrificing the auditing feature Google does. Edge Wallet doesn't seem to support passkeys itself, but the Microsoft Edge browser supports them in the single most annoying way possible. No matter the password manager you're using, Microsoft Edge tries to use Windows Hello for passkeys on Windows, not even giving your actual password manager a chance to react to the request. I just had to stop using Microsoft Edge after many years of defending it when I encountered this issue for the first time. Sorry, I just had to get this off my chest. It's almost on topic. Microsoft Edge Wallet gets a 6 in the features category. One downside of the encryption Microsoft Edge does is that you cannot access the passwords stored on Edge Wallet through a web interface. You must access them through a Microsoft Edge browser on Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, or iOS. On Windows and macOS, Wallet is just as well integrated into Microsoft Edge as Google Password Manager is in Google Chrome. On the mobile front though, Microsoft doesn't need you to install Edge in order to sync your passwords. You can just use the Microsoft Authenticator app instead, meaning there is legitimately a separate app for a separate service. Google, take notes. For these reasons, Edge Wallet gets a 7 in platforms and integration. In the ease of use and the pricing categories, I'm going to rate this as highly as Google Password Manager, as their implementations are near identical. The only difference is that Microsoft requires you to download Authenticator for passwords on iOS and Android, which is a plus in my book because they're not forcing you to use their browser just to save your credentials. In my opinion, that's even less friction than Chrome. Ease of use 8, pricing 10. Lastly, in the ease of migration category, Edge Wallet gets an 8. The implementation is almost the same as Google Password Manager, that being the standard CSV format, but the import and export buttons are hidden in a small meatballs menu on the top right of the settings page, meaning that the average user might not find it as easily as they would with Google's version. The integrated password manager in the Microsoft Edge browser is pretty alright. Nothing spectacular. I still believe you should be using a dedicated password manager app though, so keep watching.
Apple Passwords.
Up last in the integrated in the OS or browser category, we got Apple Passwords. It used to be called iCloud Keychain, but since the release of iOS 18 and macOS 15 Sequoia, it's called Passwords and it has its own dedicated app. It comes with macOS and iOS devices, and it's also available for Windows via the iCloud app from the Microsoft Store. It's cool to see Apple finally giving a crap about their password manager, so let's see how it stacks up. When it comes to privacy and security, Apple's gone all in on their marketing, claiming they're the most secure and the most private. While we have no way to verify this, we also have no way to verify the opposite. In order to determine whether Apple can be trusted with our passwords, we should examine whether they can be trusted with any of our data at all. In that sense, there have been no breaches to Apple servers that we know of, and there's legitimately a paywall when it comes to accessing your Apple ID in the form of authentication using your Apple devices. You can't even recover your password if you don't remember some form of secure PIN or don't have any access to any Apple device that is already logged in. So getting locked out of your own account for security purposes is not unlikely. This means anyone trying to compromise your account is also going to have a pretty hard time doing so. However, Apple relies solely on this form of two-factor authentication. If and when it fails one day, we're all screwed, as they don't support any other form, such as TOTP. Recently, though, they've been pushing for biometric authentication with passkeys to replace credentials, so the future is looking promising for account security with Apple IDs. You can already sign in with a passkey, completely circumventing the need to input a password while still ensuring you are the only person that can log into your account. It would be unfair to the other two big tech megacorporations if I gave Apple Passwords a 9 or 10 on security and reputation, as it isn't inherently that much safer, so I'm giving it an 8. Apple Passwords is pretty bare bones too when it comes to features. It shows you your saved passwords, whether they've appeared in a data breach so you can change them, and it also allows you to share certain passwords with your iCloud family. That's a feature we haven't seen up until now, and it's very helpful for families or friends who share subscriptions, for example. Apple Passwords can also serve as your authenticator, generating TOTPs for any service that uses them for multi-factor authentication. And of course, passkeys are here. While passkey support is technically a macOS or iOS feature in this case, I'm counting it as a feature of Apple Passwords because it shows up in the app and allows you to manage your passkeys without going into the system settings. One feature I really like on Apple devices is that this app can now show you all the Wi-Fi passwords of all the networks your device remembers. I actually had a terminal utility for that on my Mac, so I'm glad it's an official feature now. This makes Apple Passwords a basic but comprehensive credentials manager, combining accounts for websites and apps, as well as multi-factor authentication TOTPs in one service. However, it's missing features that I've seen on competing standalone software, like secure notes, separate sections for ID or banking, or really any form of customizable input. Not bad, Apple. Not bad. In the features category, Apple Passwords gets a 6. Despite its good features, Apple Passwords lacks support for all non-Apple platforms except Windows. It's not even an app on iCloud.com, meaning you're out of luck if you want to access any of those passwords or TOTPs on something like an Android phone or a Linux PC. It works on macOS and iOS, and it works through an extension and a desktop app on Microsoft Edge. As far as I can tell, Microsoft Edge is the only supported browser besides Safari. Thus, I really cannot recommend that you use this password manager as your only one unless you use nothing but Apple devices 24/7, 365, and you never need to log in anywhere without them. Apple Passwords gets an embarrassing 3 in the platforms and integration category. I'd say pretty simply that Apple Passwords is easy to use. After all, that is Apple's philosophy when it comes to their products. For one, it's a standalone app now, as opposed to its previous iteration, which was only an option in the system settings. Moreover, it's very transparent with its pop-ups, and it allows the user to not have to use it at all if they don't want to. But not everything about it is great. A lot of the time, Apple is adamant that they know better than the user what the user wants, so we get features like Hide My Email being on by default, causing immense confusion. Apple Passwords isn't just a password manager, it's the whole, way to log in on Apple devices. It works on the OS level. So if you're making a new account on an app, you might just blaze through with Apple's default settings and trust that you'll log in automatically every time. That's fine if your entire life is spent using Apple devices, but as soon as you have to log in on another device, you not only need to figure out your password, but also the email address Apple generated in the place of your real email address on your behalf. This situation happened to a friend. He didn't know his credentials for Twitter because he signed up through his iPhone and his email was a random string of letters and numbers. At the time, Apple Passwords was called iCloud Keychain, and we had to dig through iOS settings to find it. Those were the days. Not. Thankfully, nowadays, it would be easier to find those credentials because Apple has made it clearer where they can be found. They still have Hide My Email on by default as far as I know though, so that problem still occurs regularly. This is the problem with password managers that come pre-packaged and heavily integrated into OSs or browsers. They will make default settings for the user that might confuse them even though the intentions behind it are good. Despite this, I think the straightforwardness of having an app on the home screen very clearly labeled passwords, which you can open and immediately see only what you need, is admirable. Apple Passwords gets an 8 on ease of use. Apple is very lucky we took a long time to make this video, because if they hadn't spun this off from the system settings, this rating would have been way lower. Apple Passwords is genuinely free. Or is it? You kinda need an Apple device to use this app. Your Apple account is secured using Apple devices, so even if you can use the password manager without ever purchasing or connecting your iCloud account to an iPhone, iPad, or Mac, I'd say it's a little less secure that way. Plus, who's going to do that when you have so many other options? If you do own an Apple device, Apple Passwords is genuinely free. There is no upsell, there are no features locked behind a paywall, it's just standard. So, Apple Passwords gets a 9 on pricing. Here's where it gets messy. It's very obvious that Apple doesn't want you using another password manager besides their own. There are issues when it comes to migration to and from other software that make this completely unacceptable for me. I'll cut right to the chase. There's no way to import or export passwords on iOS. There just isn't. It's not in the settings, it's not in the app, it's nowhere. On macOS, as soon as you open the app for the first time, it asks you to import your passwords from your favorite browser automatically. It even supports CSV imports, just like any other credentials manager. But the only way to export passwords is through the macOS app, and it gives you a couple of scary security warnings when you try to do so to prevent the average user from exporting their passwords to go to another service. I find this really anti-competitive and downright annoying. These are similar tactics to the one that got Apple fined billions of euros by the EU. If you don't own a Mac, there is genuinely no way to import or export credentials, not even in the Windows app. I'm giving it a 3, and that's being generous. Get out of here! If you're exclusively an Apple user and you don't really care, keep using this one. Otherwise, keep watching.
LastPass.
LastPass used to be one of the most popular password managers out there during its peak. I can't give exact dates as I don't quite remember myself, but LastPass was actually my first password manager, and I used it as my only one before switching to my current one around 2021. Something happened back then which made most people switch away from LastPass. I wonder what it was. Well, I guess we'll find out. Let's address the thing LastPass is known for: getting hacked. There were at least 2 giant security breaches between August and October 2022, which left all unencrypted data completely accessible to hackers. For a password manager, this is unacceptable. But what's even more unacceptable is the fact that they didn't tell their users until December of 2022. I think it's safe to rate LastPass a 2 on security and reputation. Not only were they breached and all the unencrypted data, like website URLs, secure notes, and form-filled data, was accessed by hackers, but also the company withheld this information from its users until months later, for no apparent reason. LastPass has since tried and failed to regain some of its popularity and trust. In fact, this isn't even the main reason people left LastPass when they did. The security breach was just the cherry on top. Just from the fact that they've been hacked, however, you should be able to intuit that I do not recommend anyone use LastPass. But, for the sake of entertainment and knowledge, I will give it a proper review just as every other software on here. Along with all the standard features that any password manager should have, like encrypted storage of usernames and passwords, LastPass also has automatic login for supported websites, dark web monitoring, and a solid credentials generator. Lastly, it actually allows you to share as many passwords as you want with one other LastPass user, kind of like Apple Passwords allows you to do with your iCloud family. If you pay for premium, you can share those passwords with many users instead of just one. Pretty standard, although it doesn't support passkeys despite kind of claiming that it does on the website. It claims to support passwordless login, but what that actually means in this case is that you can access your LastPass vault via another method instead of a password. It's misleading marketing, and I'm going to talk more about it in the pricing section. LastPass gets a 6 on features. It's pretty okay, but it's not going to blow anyone away. Here's where the fun begins. So, you know how LastPass boasts support for all these platforms and how it's a cross-platform password manager? Well, as it turns out, you can only access LastPass on all the platforms if you have a premium subscription. When you sign up for a free account, you get a 30-day trial to reel you in, give you the confidence to download LastPass on your phone as well as on your computer, and get you to use it like a normal password manager. It doesn't tell you which features are premium features while you're in the trial, so you can't know what you'll miss out on once it ends. When the 30 days are up, however, you're greeted with the sad reality that you can only use LastPass on one device type, as they call it, either only on your phone or only on your PC. This is the business model that drove everyone away when it was first introduced in early 2021, as it was the first and apparently last of its kind. To my knowledge, no password manager company has been stupid enough to dare roll out such a policy before or since then, and for good reason. Limiting the platforms on which your users can use your cross-platform password manager is one of the fastest ways to kill your business. They could write a book about how to take great software and ruin it. Maybe they could collaborate on that with Elon Musk. LastPass gets a 3 on platforms integration. Yes, it does support every browser under the sun and also has desktop apps and mobile apps. But what's the point in all that when your account is only locked to using one device type if you don't pay? It's not cross-platform compatibility if it's locked behind a completely arbitrary paywall. And we know for a fact it's an arbitrary one because for years this was a free feature, as it should be. But is it easy to use at least? This password manager kind of set the standard for what every other one should look like, and then it got complacent and stopped getting ideas from competitors on how to make the user experience better. LastPass, for a non-tech savvy, end-user oriented experience, is kind of confusing. On top of all the stuff with the weird one device type policy, which confused a lot of uninformed users back in 2021, the interface today has some quirks. For example, when you're saving a password, it has this nice UI where you can input all your credentials and then make some settings like autofill or automatic login. Nice, cool, good. But then if you want to modify that same password you just saved, it takes you to a whole new tab with an archaic interface where those same settings are hidden under an advanced options menu, and one of them is even inverted. Instead of being a checkmark for autofill, it's a checkmark for disable autofill. I don't understand why they couldn't just keep the editing within the extension. I also absolutely hate this little banner that takes up like a third of the extension box that constantly tries to upsell you on premium when you've literally just downloaded the thing. The vault itself is also a new tab, but it's also not. You can access the vault from the extension, but it has this huge red vault button on the top right to take you to a new tab, which is just an older version of the vault. Look, I'm not going to get too deep into it. I am just nitpicking at this point, but no other software has left me baffled like this. Besides the design, LastPass is pretty friendly for new users. You can save passwords with an informative pop-up after you've logged in, and you can enable autofill and auto-login and not have to worry about it again. It's just that getting there is kind of hard. I honestly think LastPass has become bloated, but without actually gaining any new features. I didn't even think that was possible, but revisiting it for this video gave me war flashbacks for a war I've never fought in. LastPass gets a 5 on ease of use. The most predatory and egregious behavior of LastPass can be found in its pricing. Now, I must admit, it's fairly cheap, but it's not transparent at all with its pricing, and there is some false advertising going on here. For example, look at this screenshot. Firstly, just by looking at this, you'd think the premium plan is $2.90 a month. Well, that is technically true, until you see the fine print next to it which says billed annually. The problem with this is that you can't know how much you're about to pay up front for an entire year without pulling out a calculator. It's $34.80, by the way. When other similar software does this, they have the annual sum right next to the per month price, which is how it should be done. Please call this out wherever you see it. It's a scummy business practice. As you can see in this screenshot, although the dark pattern of gray text on lighter gray background is here too, the annual price is very transparently stated right under what it would be if it was a monthly charge. Moving on from this, secondly, charging for basic features such as being able to use your vault on any device or securing it with biometric authentication is absolutely ridiculous. They know they've been hacked, yet they still put security measures behind a paywall? I mean, how delusional can a company be with pricing? Look, it's kinda cheap, but it provides nowhere near as much value as some of its competitors with way better features, and it's scummy. 4 on pricing. To make matters even worse for LastPass and absolutely destroy it in the eyes of everyone watching this video, its export function has been broken since 2021. Now, what I'm about to say is an unsubstantiated claim, and I'm not accusing LastPass of anything here, but that date coincides with their introduction of a horrible business model that saw a lot of people exporting their data and taking their password management business elsewhere. Exporting is broken to this day, and there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement from the company on this. I mean, you can still export properly if you go through 12 hoops and sing a little song, but you shouldn't have to do that. Basically, there are multiple ways to export your passwords from LastPass, but only one of them works right. The rest of them spew out a broken CSV that doesn't contain almost any data. Importing via CSV works fine though. Obviously, why wouldn't it? I'm giving it a 3 in ease of migration, and that's only because importing works. You should always be able to export your data in a standard format in an easy and accessible way, and it's unacceptable that LastPass doesn't let you do that most of the time. I believe they might be breaking GDPR law with this one actually, because you're supposed to be able to export your data according to that law. But hey, I'm not a legal expert. EU lawmakers, if you're watching this and if I'm right, hit LastPass with a fine for the last 3 years of GDPR non-compliance for me. Thank you. It genuinely feels like the software is abandoned and it's just there to make as much money as it still can for the company. And it looks like it's working because businesses are still buying LastPass contracts and pushing it to their employees to this day. I used to work on one of them and I would get nagging emails every week because I hadn't signed up for a company-mandated LastPass account. Anyway, that's all on this one. Get it out of here.
1Password.
Moving on from that dumpster fire, we come to 1Password. It's one of the most popular password managers out there, and you've definitely seen ads for it over the years. Just like most other password managers on this list, 1Password has a pretty good reputation when it comes to keeping your data safe. They haven't had any data leaks of their own, and while there was a headline saying otherwise pretty recently, it was very misleading. Basically, just like a lot of other password managers, some of which are in this video, 1Password was mentioned in an article by Forbes that shed light on an Android autofill vulnerability that exposed passwords. It didn't matter what your password manager was in that case because if your Android device was compromised, so were your passwords via the autofill vulnerability. So I won't count this as a 1Password issue. 1Password has a page on their support portal outlining their security protocols, and while the buzzwords sound convincing, I do have one bone to pick. Yes, it is end-to-end encrypted, uses 256-bit AES encryption, along with a bunch of security enhancing tactics on top of that, but what I want to scrutinize is 1Password's claim of transparency. They have this whole section on transparency where they claim, quote, full transparency makes sure 1Password can be and is audited by experts. Now, this is very vague marketing talk, so I wanted to see what they meant by transparency. To me, transparency means the code is open source so that it can not only be audited by these experts that they never name in this article, but also by the general public. After all, that's how the XZ vulnerability was found, real users auditing the code. So let's see how much of 1Password is open source. Well, the database is built with SQLite. That's it. The rest of their transparency section talks about how they care about your privacy and they don't collect more data than they need, yada yada yada, just marketing talk with no way to prove it. There is genuinely nothing else besides the algorithms and the database structure that is open source about this. I don't doubt that they audit their code, but you can't call it transparent if it literally isn't. This is as much a black box as any other company's closed source software is a black box, so I really disagree with the wording here. Thankfully, 1Password publishes some of the audits that the experts carry out on their software. They don't publish all of the audits though, and it's up to their discretion what they publish and what they don't. Look, I don't know how to feel about this. I don't like the combination of vague marketing language and the admittance that they don't post all their audits. Sure, I prefer this honesty to no info at all, but it doesn't inspire all the confidence in the world in me. My other concern is that 1Password is one of the most popular password managers on the market, and AgileBits, the company that makes it, is only in the business of storing your credentials. They have no other products. This, combined with their closed source nature, means that they're a prime target for hackers. Of course, there are security measures in place to prevent 1Password from getting hacked, but if a vulnerability is found by hackers before an auditor can find it, your data is at risk. Closed source for-profit software like this is much harder for me to trust than an open source solution, especially when they take it upon themselves to store your data for you. At the same time, it's harder for me to trust than something like Google Password Manager because Google's security measures are practically impenetrable as opposed to this small company who may or may not be able to protect themselves adequately from cyber attacks. Again, we don't know. One might say that since it's their business to securely store your data, they should be really good at it. But then again, until 2022, LastPass had an amazing track record for security. LastPass also had experts examine it, they published the audits, the whole 9 yards, and they still got hacked. So don't count on a company to tell you how good they are at their job. Judge for yourself. This one gets a 7 in security and reputation. It has a good track record so far, and it looks reassuring for the average user, but as I mentioned before, things could change at any moment with software like this. Let LastPass be an example of that. 1Password is pretty good when it comes to features, as I would expect from a product like this. It supports autofill on all platforms, 2FA code generation, passkeys, dark web scanning and monitoring, different kinds of credentials like card details and addresses for online orders, and secure notes. I just hope the secure notes are actually secure in this one. Also, the credentials generator has history, which is really thoughtful. The main feature of 1Password is multiple vaults. Of course, it's an optional feature, but 1Password displays it very prominently in the UI. Not only can you make multiple vaults, but you can also make hidden vaults for those accounts that even you don't want to remember you have because it fills you with crippling guilt. It also allows you to share passwords with others, whether they're family or team members that use 1Password, or even with people that don't use a password manager at all. Now, I don't know how secure that is, but it's a feature alright. 1Password also supports custom input fields in your entries. You can add things like answers to security questions, text, URLs, street addresses, dates, and sign-in providers to your entries so that you don't have to remember truly anything about your own identity. This isn't as comprehensive a list of custom input fields as I would like, but it'll do for 99% of use cases. One standout feature for me is the official 1Password CLI, or command line interface. It's super rare for password managers to have command line interfaces, so I'm very happy to see this one. You can basically manage your entire credentials database without leaving the terminal if you're one of those people that have those riced out aesthetic void Linux installs with the anime girl wallpapers. For the rest of us, it's just a cool feature. I think it's a pretty feature-rich password manager. I do think the multiple vaults feature being the star of the show really works for the presentation of this software, and the CLI is super cool. 1Password gets a 9 in the features category. 1Password is available on Mac, iOS, Windows, Android, Linux, and web browsers, including Chrome OS. On all these platforms, 1Password integrates really well. If you have an older version of your OS, in some cases you might not be able to get the latest features, as 1Password's major versions have big discrepancies in feature sets. If you're like most people and you're not daily driving a device from 10 years ago, you should be perfectly fine on all platforms. Touch ID, Face ID, security keys, Windows Hello, everything. Even on Linux, the 1Password team has worked hard to make this as seamless an experience as possible. 1Password gets a 10 on platforms and integration. I really don't know what could be done better here. This is exemplary. Despite its many features, 1Password takes a very user-oriented approach to its design. It is, dare I say, cute. Although it takes on a form similar to that of most other password managers, I feel that the branding and presentation of this software make it easier for the average user to grasp than other password managers with similar but not quite as elegant design. It is very clear this is a for-profit company with a consumer-oriented product. While it has similar or even identical features to the other credential managers in this video, 1Password manages to look way less intimidating for the average user. Of course, it won't be as dead simple to use as something like Apple Passwords due to how much it offers, but I think 1Password can get a solid 8 in ease of use. Everything is predictably and logically arranged, and I believe even non-tech savvy users can learn to use the software pretty easily, even if they don't understand right away how to dive into its advanced features. When it comes to price, 1Password is probably the most expensive one so far. And it also does the scummy thing that LastPass does on its pricing page where it doesn't tell you how much you'll pay upfront annually. I still find it scummy, even when good software does it. 1Password for individuals costs $36 a year if paid upfront for an entire year. It costs $48 a year if paid monthly at $4 a month. The family plan, which supports up to 5 family members, costs $60 a year paid annually. If paid monthly, it's $83.40 a year. Overall, kind of expensive. If you want the peace of mind, it might be a good enough price to pay, but I'm just letting you know right now, there are competitors later on in this video that are on par with 1Password in features for cheaper. While 1Password gets a 5 on pricing, don't write it off just yet, because if you're switching from another password manager with a subscription, the story is a little different. Importing and exporting is dead simple. Standard CSV or their own proprietary format. Works on all PC platforms. Great, cool. But what makes 1Password's ease of migration stand out is that they will help you out financially if you're transferring from another paid password manager. If you're signing up for a business, Teams, or individual annual subscription for 1Password, they claim that you can get in touch with them and they will credit you the remainder of your invoice with the competitor you're switching from. I'm not entirely certain about the terms and conditions, but they advertise it like this on their website. I'm just the messenger, don't shoot me. This financial incentive, on top of the actual ease of migration the software provides, wins 1Password a 10 in the ease of migration category. 1Password in general is a great all-rounder. Not the very best at anything in particular, but not missing anything for almost every single user imaginable. The only real complaints I have are the pricing and the opaqueness of this closed-source software that sometimes pretends to be more transparent than it is. So if you're looking for the exact opposite, something completely open source and transparent but hard as hell to set up, maybe the next contender will interest you.
KeePassXC.
For this section, I'm not really an expert, so I've asked someone who is to come on and present the software for me instead. Here's Felix Sturmat to talk about KeePass. That's not the right aspect ratio. I said 4:3. What is this? Hey, listen, hey, hello, hi.
Some weeks ago, Kalos gave me, or Chris gave me some very clear instructions on how to do this part. And I'm sure that we've also agreed upon a specific video resolution, the password manager that I'm supposed to deal with, and a submission deadline for me to keep in mind. So if I, against all self-inflicted odds, still managed to become a part of this video, I don't want to waste your time any further and get started with password safe by Counterpane Systems. Just look at the sheer 90s-ness of this lock screen. It looks like the kind of lock screen that denies you access to the Gibson. But why am I even dealing with this? Password Safe happens to be the OG of password managers. It was developed by a guy called Bruce Schneier, an academic megamind in the realms of computer security and cryptography, and this is what a signature looks like. Back in 1997, Password Safe was released under a freeware license, making it available to the common man, kind of. Due to legal remnants of the Cold War era, cryptographic algorithms were still treated as export-restricted munition, so in order for Counterpane Systems to comply with US law, they required you to confirm your US citizenship by making you tick a few boxes before you were granted access to their product. And as you can see, this was quite an effective measure to allow for an average Joe to obtain the software but prevent Otto Normalverbraucher, Vasya Pupkin, or even worse, Felix Sturmat from doing the same. Let's keep in mind, this particular version of Password Safe is old enough to drink and drive. You know, separately, with a few hours and a few pieces of chewing gum in between, not simultaneously. And despite the age, this thing does everything that a basic password manager needs to do. On first launch, you are prompted to specify your passphrase and a local database file that your encrypted passwords are supposed to be stored in. Once that is done, you can add a variety of credentials to that thing, even with the option of having it generate a random password for you. And in case you want to retrieve it, Password Safe will conveniently drop that password into your clipboard. I can say, with the unhinged confidence of a 15-year-old who has just discovered politics, that all the password managers presented and yet to be presented to you are in fact, in one way or another, a copycat of this password safe thingy. And by the way, this OG is still among us, being maintained by volunteers, and ever since cryptographic code has stopped being a weapon in a legal context, released under a non-discriminatory open source license. So the question arises, do I expect you to stick to the OG for the OG-ness' sake? Well, if you take a look at the current timestamp of this video, whatever it might be, it feels as if the market for password management solutions is somewhat oversaturated, and when going down the open source route, the variety might be just as confusing. Route? But before slapping my Felix Sturmat seal of OG-ness and quality seal on Password Safe, I'd like to present a few alternatives to you. And if I'm not mistaken, I do think that Chris would definitely want me to rate these individual pieces of software by using the same grading system that he has been using. You know, security and reputation, features, platforms and integration, and so on and so forth. But before diving into that, there's one particular thing that has been bugging me the entire time. This file right here, that's supposed to contain all of my precious passwords from my previous life that I used to live. You know, before the incident. Is it gonna work with the newest release of Password Safe? And the answer is kind of. Your passwords will remain, but everything else, such as usernames and nodes, will be gone. But if you decided to upgrade to version 2.0 and then export your file into the version 2 format, even the latest version of Password Safe will have no problem reading that, even though having to do this version hopping in the first place makes Password Safe look somewhat inconsistent to me. But here's the cool thing. Having turned open source with version 2.0, that was 20 years ago by the way, it has stopped trying to trap you into its ecosystem and hold your data hostage. You were given the option to export the entirety. Oh Gott, der blöde hat schon wieder den Geist aufgegeben. You were given the option to export the entirety of your passwords into an unencrypted plain text file. This might look somewhat counterintuitive at first, but I happen to run a similarly outdated version of KeePass on this computer, which happens to be a spiritual successor of Password Safe. And once I have created a KeePass native database file, KeePass allows me to import the entirety of my passwords by using that text file. And on top of that, I can now categorize passwords into groups and also attach files to that newly created database. So while Password Safe took 7 years to become fully open source, KeePass did so right away. And even though KeePass provides all the basic features that you want a password manager to have, even when run on a literal potato, that potato still needs to be a Windows machine, having this software face a similar fate as Notepad++ for instance. So KeePass has tried to address this issue by releasing a multi-platform 2.x variant with an entirely new codebase, while still maintaining the 1.x Windows-only strain of KeePass. If this is confusing to you, I can reassure you, you are not alone and even developers felt the same way. To add even more confusion on top of that confusion, KeePass 2.x heavily relies on a third-party runtime framework to do its job. So Password Safe has lost its former leadership position, or let's say mewing streak, by not being open source right away. And KeePass made the mistake of being open source but not multi-platform on top of that right away. So hear me out. If I happen to be the maintainer of KeePass who did a genuinely innocent mistake of initially underestimating the popularity of Linux and macOS, and then tried to make up for that mistake by creating an entirely new codebase from scratch, the most humiliating thing I could imagine going through is to have somebody else take my old codebase, rewrite that in a multi-platform manner, call that thing hell knows what, KeePassXC, and just mock the very thing that I myself have written, leading me to the next piece of software, KeePassXC. I don't mean to be anticlimactic when saying this, but the matter of fact is that it does the very same thing as KeePass. Hell yeah, it even allows me to import the old KDB file from KeePass and have it create a KDBX file for me. That's the file format both KeePass and KeePassXC have introduced back in 2008 in order to bypass a few limitations that the old KDB format used to have. But karma happens to be a female dog. And you don't have to be that one guy that, by letting your God-given intellect and divine intuition speak its mind, ends up spoiling the whole f***ing movie in order to know what happened next. Let's allow for another competitor, KeePassXC, this ain't a joke by the way, to speak on its own behalf and allow it to justify its existence. Why is there another copycat of the copycat's copycat that is called KeePassXC? And to keep it short, KeePassXC, having been the cross-platform open source password manager for many years, went through a decline in code frequency, probably due to some if it ain't broke don't fix it mentality. We start off with a blank file, we specify a secret passphrase, start feeding that file with our precious credentials and rely on the program's encryption algorithm to do its one and only job of keeping that file in an unreadable and unretrievable state unless we want to or are made to re-enter that secret passphrase. This having been the status quo in terms of functionality for nearly 2 decades since Password Safe's initial release. And while this approach is timelessly pragmatic and allows you to create an infinite amount of backups of that database, we have all stopped working on that one and only single monolith workstation for years by now, and instead we turned into some kind of metropolitan hipster that travels around Greece and needs to work with multiple ecosystems on the go in one way or another. So the need for something that stays synced across many devices while still being open source kept on growing. That's something that a project called KeyWeb has been trying to address. But before diving into KeyWeb, I need to tell you that I'm heavily biased in favor of it, despite its weaknesses. So before I end up spreading the fanboyism, take all of it with a good grain of salt and wait for me until I'm done cooking. KeeWeb saw its first release in 2016, the last year that KeePassXC has received its latest update. While it still allows you to create, read and edit a KeePass compatible database file on a local drive of yours, it also allows you to do the same thing with cloud storage solutions such as Google Drive and Dropbox. And KeeWeb really took care of all the strawman arguments one could potentially have against this kind of setup. You know, what if someone else gains access to that cloud storage? And so what? The decryption takes place on your very own device. Even if someone obtains your KDBX file through vicious means, it's still gonna be useless unless they happen to know your secret passphrase for whatever reason. But what if I don't trust big tech? And in this case, you're just like me. But the cool thing is, KeeWeb also comes with WebDAV support, allowing you to use self-hosted cloud storage. But what if I get cancelled and my server's being taken offline? And yeah, for the sake of argument, let's assume this is a valid concern to you. In a world like this, you can get cancelled for basically anything. For instance, refusing to bow down to literal PDF files and their crazy demands, looped up in euphemisms such as monthly bill, reminder or termination warning. And for real, that's all that it takes for GoDaddy to go daddy on your domains and servers. They don't even hide it. But thanks to KeeWeb's thought out design, you can still use it and pull out your credentials in case your cloud storage or you yourself have gone offline. I really like it, I like the way it looks. I have used it myself, but unfortunately I have to discourage you from putting your eggs into this basket. It has been maintained until 2021, but it has never seen an update ever since. And installing this thing on Linux has become increasingly complicated due to the lack of maintenance. And all the workarounds involve giving up security to a certain degree. So let's allow for KeePassXC to enter the stage. And in terms of security and reputation, KeePassXC is an absolute top dog. It's still being maintained up to this day, and when looking at Linux distributions that are catered to the truly paranoid, it's likely to be pre-installed. And just like KeePass, KeePassXC and KeeWeb, its default file format happens to be KDBX, and it comes with a bunch of new features on top of that. You can unlock the database by using a YubiKey, you can store TOTP secrets inside of that database, and they are providing official plugins that allow you to seamlessly integrate that KeePassXC experience into your own internet browser. But do you know what I miss? It's all that cloud storage stuff that KeeWeb used to have, like where has it gone? And when taking another look at their FAQ, they are quite upfront about this. Cloud synchronization can be easily accomplished by simply storing a KeePassXC database file inside your cloud and letting it rest. We prefer this approach because it's simple, not tied to a specific cloud provider, and keeps the complexity of a code low. And from a developer's perspective, I do get their point. They wanted to have something that does one job and does that job well, while allowing for other developers to extend upon that base functionality when needed. But from a reasonable, comfort-seeking end-user's perspective, let's be real, it's all just nerdy Unix philosophical metaphysics shit, and they shot themselves in the foot with that. So yeah, if you want to make use of KeePassXC and its features, all of that is still being done through a file that's located somewhere in your computer's file system. You are free to use anything that has a drive letter or can be retrofit into having a drive letter. So what do I mean by this? While I was presenting KeePassXC and KeePassXC to you, I have been using a network drive. A network drive that was provided by this computer. And where did those files end up? Here. This is my password storage. And if this thing looks too fragile to you, I agree. That's why I have set up another network drive. And once I copy my KDBX file into this directory, let's copy it. There it is. It will end up on this thing. And this is what I love about dealing with a KDBX file. I'm free to duplicate it, I'm free to hide it, I'm free to bury it, and I'm free to destroy the original. Simple as. At this point I've showcased 5 different pieces of software. They all happen to be open source and they all do to a certain extent the very same thing. And in theory I'd have to give each of them an individual score, but why should I? When writing password save off as a historic relic and instead focusing on all these KeePass derivatives, you will come to the conclusion that we are not dealing with a convoluted mess of inner competing solutions, but an entire cross-compatible ecosystem. KeePass itself might have failed at becoming the go-to solution for open source password management needs, but their well-documented KDBX file format has become a de facto standard for anyone who's trying to, once again, reinvent the wheel that is called open source password managers and maybe, just maybe, become the next KeePassXC. Let's keep in mind that Chris just wanted me to present KeePassXC to you, and it's fair to say that I shit at the original assignment, as my goal was not to control the content of this video, but to create context.
Windows.
And in order to comply with this grading system at least, allow me to rush through that in a somewhat procrastinative manner. Security and reputation. Due to the free and open source nature of these products, I allow myself to give it a 10. If you are free and allowed to audit the source code in your very own kitchen, I do believe that these people know what they are doing. Features. When disregarding KeePassXC's lack of native cloud storage support, I allow myself to say that it supports everything that you could possibly need. That's a 9. Platforms and integration. Well, KeePassXC does not happen to have an official release for Android or iOS, for instance, but since we are dealing with an open standard, you can find KDBX compatible password managers for all sorts of platforms. We are dealing with the doom of password managers. If there is no port that has been made yet, it will eventually be. Straight 10. Ease of use. I'm sorry, but if you insist on managing your passwords on multiple devices and keep it synced reliably, you will have to do some tinkering, unless you want to carry a USB stick on a physical keychain, or even worse, a necklace. Like, who are you? A crypto bro with a cold wallet who swears it's gonna bail him out of his McDonald's job? I'm generous by giving it a 1. Ease of migration. As I said, it's a standard, it allows you to export your data, and you can always go to a competitor, be it an open source or a commercial one, and take your passwords with you. 10. Unfortunately, it seems as if I'll have to say goodbye to you and allow for Chris to regain control over his own video. But if you'd like to watch some other content pieces of mine, feel free to visit my channel and leave a like.
I think you've said enough, Felix. Thank you for that totally necessary and not convoluted history lesson. Oh, and we also got to know about KeePassXC. It's actually my number 3 pick.
Enpass.
Enpass is a lesser known credentials manager that actually really impressed me. It has a few quirks that make it a very strong contender, but also a very strange one. When it comes to security and reputation, Enpass takes a different approach from competitors for securing your data. Instead of having their own servers where they store your credentials behind an account, Enpass generates an encrypted file secured with a master password that contains all your data and stores it locally on your machine, kind of like KeePassXC. This doesn't mean, however, that you can't sync your stuff between your devices. In case you want to do that, Enpass supports a bunch of cloud storage providers for remote sync, and if you don't want to mess with cloud storage at all, it supports syncing via local network without ever traveling through the internet. This means that you are in charge of securely storing your credentials and making sure your master password isn't guessable. If you don't want to go entirely local with it, you're gonna have to trust a cloud storage provider like Google Drive or Dropbox. On the bright side, this means that Enpass cannot leak any of your data because they never even had it to begin with, and they never will. But on the other hand, if your cloud service provider gets compromised and your passwords file gets stolen, you better have a strong master password because that's the only thing keeping your data encrypted. Enpass gets more points in security for its audit page. Despite your passwords never leaving your devices, Enpass somehow still manages to do scans of data leaks to notify you if any of your credentials have been compromised and should be changed. Extra points for little features like clearing your clipboard 30 seconds after copying a password and making sure it doesn't appear in your clipboard history. Enpass gets a 9 in security and reputation. In the features area, where other password managers fall short, Enpass steps up. Obviously, it can store login credentials, but thankfully, it can also do much more than that. There are dedicated categories for other forms of secure credential storage like credit cards, identity info, bank accounts, licenses, travel passes, SSH keys, and so on. You don't have to create makeshift username and password entries for stuff that isn't that simple, and yet you don't have to make simple logins complicated. Other password managers can also do this, but Enpass makes it way clearer to the user that this is not only a possibility, but a purposeful feature. You can create multiple vaults if you're so inclined, and you can add custom input fields to your entries for accounts that have a lot of different keys connecting to them. For example, if you have a Google account, you might want to store the username, password, Gmail SMTP key, two-factor authentication key, and whatever else is connected to this account. Or you might want to store multiple account credentials in one entry for easier access. Speaking of two-factor authentication keys, Enpass can also be your authenticator, generating TOTP codes for accounts that use them. It also supports passkeys, which can be added with one click to the existing entry for the account that the passkey corresponds to. Really cool stuff. Also, once again, this Password Managers Credentials Generator has history. So good, so tasty. Lastly, there is a pop-up window called the Enpass Assistant that you can bring up with a system-wide keyboard shortcut, which acts kind of like the browser extension. It's just a mini version of the app for very quick and easy access. This concoction of features is going to earn Enpass a 9 in the features category. I truly have no complaints here, but it could have had a CLI too. While Enpass doesn't have a web app due to its architecture, it has something even better. Native apps on almost every platform you can think of. The only platforms with a sizable user base that Enpass doesn't support are BSDs and ARM64 builds of Linux. That's it. Every other major platform, including every browser that supports extensions, is supported by Enpass. You don't even have to install it on your computer if you don't want to. You can get a portable version, for example to keep on a USB stick, for Windows, macOS, and Linux. The only catch is that for the browser extension to work, you need to have the app installed on your computer. And that makes sense because how else would the extension have access to the encrypted file? Also, Enpass doesn't just support platforms on a surface level, it tries hard to deeply integrate into them and provide a seamless experience. It supports system-wide autofill on both iOS and Android, Windows Hello on Windows, and Touch ID on macOS. Overall, I couldn't be happier with Enpass in the platform's integration section, so it gets a 10. You might disagree with me here, but I feel like ease of use is the area where Enpass falters a little. Sure, it's feature-rich, secure, and very convenient, but the way its features are communicated to the user is not fantastic. When you first open up Enpass, it looks overwhelming as hell for non-tech-savvy people. I mean, imagine your mom or your grandpa trying to use this. There's just a few too many buttons and options available from the main screen. Of course, I understand that this is because Enpass has a lot of useful features that it really wants you to use, but sometimes that gets in the way of it being simple to understand. Take, for example, the case of creating a new entry for a login. You press the little plus button, and suddenly you're bombarded with this templates page. Obviously, if you're confident with technology, you're gonna choose default to see what it does, and find that it's just the normal username and password input fields. But other people might think they've done something wrong upon seeing an unfamiliar screen like that with no clear option to move forward, and believe there is too much friction in this software for them to use. Templates are a cool feature, but they're shoved in your face every time you create an entry, which is just bad design. They should be a drop-down menu option for those that want to use them, not the first thing you see when trying to store a login. Also, the average person really needs to have the concept of an encrypted file explained to them. It just isn't as simple as you log in, you got your stuff. In this case, you have to know where your encrypted file is located, import it, know the master password to unlock it, and then make sure to remember where that file is located for the foreseeable future. When it comes to Cloud Sync, things become even more complicated to explain to the average person because there's another account in the way by that point, and it's just a recipe for guaranteed confusion. The fact of the matter is, no matter how many times you explain it to some people, they're just never gonna get it. And for those people, I cannot recommend Enpass. Don't suggest this to anyone that struggles with technology. Please save yourself the trouble of explaining how everything works every 2 weeks, or worse, managing another person's passwords entirely. To end this section on a good note, Enpass is wonderful to use for a user that knows what they're doing. I really can't fault it there. It's a well-designed app, and the issue of it bearing its features in plain sight becomes an advantage if you know what you're looking for, because it makes the customization very easy to find. Enpass gets a 6 on ease of use. There's a free version of Enpass for desktop, which gives you access to many of the features, but the catch is that you can only store up to 25 entries on your mobile device at any given time. If you want to have all the features on all your devices, you're going to have to go for one of the paid options. Enpass has changed its pricing model a couple of times throughout its life so far. It used to be way cheaper than it is now, but you used to have to pay for each device that was connected to your account. Those days are over, and that's probably for the better because I can't imagine that was very profitable for this company. However, despite becoming way more expensive at some point, they still honored all the customers that purchased lifetime licenses for dirt cheap. The way the pricing works now is much more conventional since Enpass switched to a seamless subscription model in 2019. Whichever plan you choose to buy, please take note that it is billed annually. This means that while it says $199 per month for the individual plan, you'll actually be charged around $24 and you'll have the service for a year. This is thankfully plainly stated on the website, unlike certain other competitors we've talked about already. I'd say Enpass is priced very competitively. They offer a family plan that's barely more expensive than the individual plan, and it can serve up to 6 people. So if you and your friends decide you all want Enpass, you can split the costs and it'll be way cheaper and way more worth your money than something like LastPass, for example. Enpass is also one of the only remaining pieces of software that offers a one-time fee for a permanent license. At $100, it can seem expensive, but that's like paying up front for 4 years of service and having the service for as long as it exists. Enpass gets a 7 on pricing. It's very competitively priced and offers amazing value for money given the amount of features it unlocks, but it could still be a little cheaper. Exporting your passwords with Enpass is pretty easy, and it allows you to export in JSON, CSV, and TXT formats. Importing is also very easy with CSV files, and it actually supports automatic imports from other password managers if you want. No notes here. 10 out of 10. Enpass is really, really nice. It's a joy to use, it's intuitive, it's native, and once you get the hang of it, it's not that hard to explain to other people the concept of an encrypted file that serves as the vault. Enpass is my number 2 pick.
Bitwarden.
One of the most popular open source password managers for the well-informed average user. Bitwarden has garnered quite a fanbase over the years with its feature richness and free as in freedom nature. But how does it stack up to the rest? On the front of security and reputation, Bitwarden claims to excel where others don't. We cannot talk about its reputation without talking about its open source nature. Almost every single part of Bitwarden is open source. This means that the code not only can be, but also is. This means that the code can be and is audited not only by researchers commissioned by Bitwarden, but also by the general public. There is also a HackerOne program for Bitwarden, allowing users who find vulnerabilities to be paid for finding them, incentivizing constant scrutiny of the codebase. The only closed source part is the licensing mechanism, which I will talk about later on. As for how and where Bitwarden stores your passwords, it depends. If you use their servers, they use Microsoft Azure servers on the cloud. Within those servers, your passwords are stored in an encrypted format so that even if those servers get hacked, your data cannot be decoded by malicious actors. It is decrypted on device through the apps or browser extensions. If you don't want your stuff on the cloud at all, that's also an option. You can self-host Bitwarden on your own server, either on your own private cloud or in your home. If you want to learn how to host a server in your home, check out our video called the $0 Home Server. One really interesting security feature in Bitwarden is the ability to not only change the encryption algorithm used to derive your master password, but also the KDF iterations used by said algorithm. I'm not going to get into it now, but it's a security feature I haven't seen in any other password manager, and it allows for extra security for those that know what they're doing. Bitwarden has no history of data leaks, despite having been around for years. It seems that the security measures they've put in place are paying off. Although the default options leave you a little more vulnerable than an ultra-secure multi-factor authenticated secret physical vault on a remote island would, the potential for extreme security measures is there with Bitwarden, and I really like that. It doesn't force the average user to be paranoid, but it lets the paranoid ease their mind. Bitwarden gets a 9 on security and reputation. To say that Bitwarden is feature-rich would be an understatement. I'm truly in awe here because Bitwarden has every single feature I've seen in all the other password managers I've reviewed so far. Custom input fields, multiple vaults in the form of organizations, passkeys, password sharing through organizations, security reports, a command line interface, which I gave 1 password extra points for, password generation history and clipboard clearing, and even TOTP codes. The catch here is that TOTP codes can only appear in the Bitwarden app if you have a premium account. Otherwise, you have to use a separate app called Bitwarden Authenticator on iOS or Android, meaning you can have your TOTP codes on a PC without being a paying customer. The functionality is still there for free users, just only on mobile devices. The rest of the features are 100% free. They have a few limitations on organizations and password sharing, but if you just want to share a few passwords with one other person, you don't have to upgrade. There's also this premium feature called Emergency Access, which ensures that a person you trust can request to access your vault in case you cannot anymore due to unforeseen emergency circumstances. Bitwarden gets a 10 on features. I truly don't know what else I could want. As for what platforms Bitwarden supports and how well it integrates, let's see. We've got Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, iOS, Chrome OS, and web browsers. Also, we've got an Apple watchOS app, but it's only for premium users as it only supports TOTP codes, not passwords. As for hosting, you can self-host Bitwarden on Windows or Linux as long as your machine is x86-64 and not ARM-based. This unfortunately does mean that as of the making of this video, you cannot self-host Bitwarden on a Raspberry Pi, which is a very strange decision from the team. If you're watching this in the future, please check that they've fixed this issue. You can use unlimited devices on your account, there's no paywall on that, unlike certain other competitors. Plus, Bitwarden tries to integrate as well as possible into every platform it supports. However, I have encountered bugs when it comes to biometric authentication in the browser extensions. No such bugs in the native apps though. Bitwarden gets a 9 on platforms and integration. I just don't understand why ARM64 hosts aren't supported. It's not just the future, it's the present. Get with the times, please. Here's where I'm going to have to be a little harsher. When it comes to ease of use, Bitwarden falls short. Look, it's not hard to use per se, but the visual language is not only inconsistent between platforms, it also just doesn't make sense a lot of the time. For example, in the browser extension, the title bar has buttons that change depending on the screen you're at. Also, if you're on a website you've saved passwords for, clicking on the entry will autofill the credentials on the website. But if you're on a website and you're looking at vault entries for a different website, clicking on that entry will expand it. Why? It's just really inconsistent. It has a learning curve for sure, and I guess that's just the nature of open source software sometimes. You know what I mean. It's made by developers, not designers. And that's bad. I'm going to remove points for this. I want to be able to recommend the software to people, but it's tedious. And if it's tedious to use, I can't be certain that the person I'm recommending to won't get confused. The basic features of it work well and are easy enough to figure out, but Bitwarden could use designers and a purposeful redesign as a whole. I really don't want the buttons and actions of a piece of software to be context dependent. As if that wasn't enough, certain features like organizations and 2FA login methods are only available in the web version of your vault, which isn't ever communicated to you, and for which there is no button to quickly take you there from the browser extension. Come on, how hard would it be to make all the settings and features available in the apps? Lastly, if you want to self-host Bitwarden, obviously you need to be tech savvy. I'm not going to remove points for this, but I'm just putting it out there. So, Bitwarden gets a 5 on ease of use. Please redesign the entire interface. I am not kidding. Now, pricing. Let's address the elephant in the room. How does an open source program have a subscription? Well, in order for a self-hosted server to have all the features, it needs to have a paid license. That is the only closed source part of Bitwarden. So, if you want to have all the features in your account on Bitwarden's own servers, you also need a subscription. Simple enough. What features are you missing by not paying a single dime to this company though? TOTP codes integrated in the app, 1 GB of encrypted storage, hardware key support, extended organization features, and emergency access, I guess. That's it. The rest of the features, everything I talked about before, is free. Oh, and the premium plan is only $10. Oh, you thought I meant per month? No. $10 a year. $40 a year for a family plan of up to 6 people. Look, they have to make money somehow. I think obviously it can't get a 10 on pricing because there is a premium option, but this is the least predatory and also the single cheapest premium plan out of any password manager I've ever reviewed. 9. Remember when I said certain features are hidden within the web interface instead of the apps? Well, I'm glad to let you know that importing and exporting passwords is not one of those features. You can very easily find migration options in the settings of the Bitwarden app on any platform, and it supports CSV, JSON, and encrypted JSON for both imports and exports. Exemplary. Bravo. 10. on ASIC migration. In short, Bitwarden is very cool. It's the cheapest and most feature-rich password manager in this video if you're willing to deal with its somewhat clunky interface. I feel safe recommending it to you, the viewer, because you're tech-savvy enough to be watching a video on password managers, so you won't have much trouble figuring it out. But if you're looking for a solution for, let's say, your family, be ready to teach them how to use this one, as it's not very apparent. Despite this, it is my number one pick.
Lightning round.
Obviously, 8 password managers is a lot of contenders, and we already know we missed some, which we will attempt to cover very quickly in this lightning round. There will undoubtedly be people in the comments asking how on earth we could miss this or that password manager, but the simple truth is, this video would have never come out if we reviewed every single software under the sun. The funniest part about that last sentence is that this video took like 7 months to make anyway, because we wanted to make the most comprehensive video we could. We are just 2 people running this channel after all, and we'd really appreciate your support so we can continue to make videos like this. So if you ended up enjoying this video, we'd like to ask you to subscribe, as almost 98% of our viewers are not subscribed, meaning they'll most likely miss the next video we make. And if you liked it, press like. Now, we've also got a Discord server, link in the description. We didn't cover the following password managers for the following reason. Zoho Vault. We wouldn't be able to do it justice as a standalone product in this video. We would like to dive more in depth into the Zoho ecosystem at a later time. Still, its free plan is very good for personal use. ProtonPass. Similarly to Zoho Vault, we decided we couldn't do ProtonPass justice by treating it like a standalone product when it's part of a larger offering. Dashlane. It's too business oriented these days and they no longer advertise to individual consumers. Still, it's pretty good. NordPass. Fake limited sales on the website. I will never recommend any software that does this, no matter how good the software is. LastPass. It's a password calculator. Very cool, just not a password manager. We felt that taking time away from viable password managers to nerd out over this one would be unfair. Keeper. Very similar to 1Password and others, but way less beginner-friendly and way more business-oriented. Still, it's pretty good. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope my suggestions helped you decide which password manager is right for you. While my favorite is Bitwarden, yours might be something else. Let us know in the comments below or on our Discord server, which you can find a link to in the description. I'm Kalos, I like computers, and I'll see you next time.